Lenny Lugao, 40 times 4 equals 1600, Lenny NBA. All of this disinformation campaigns were already fact-checked and corrected within the status quo. But the problem is that you can still see the slides reappear in almost every social media discussion about Lenny, because fake news doesn't need to remain uncontested to remain powerful. We say that it only needs to reach the people first, shape their first impression, and become the most part of the political common sense that they need to repeat due to their confirmation bias. That is why we say, in those instances of harms that we have mentioned, are actually critical in order for you to evaluate the debate, because the harms that we have talked about outweighs any marginal cost of benefit that they have talked about, because it's more permanent, it harms more people, and it reaches more people on the ground. A few points of clarification then. First, this is a THBT motion. We just need to point out that the harms are actually irreversible than the thin harm or thin margin of benefits that it creates. This is not a THR debate. Read the UADC manual. We don't need to suck the dick of traditional media in order for us to create like a comparative model. And second, this is an evaluation of the status quo. Absent the rise of influencer journalism, the institutions that they have mentioned still exist. Because even absent the rise, they have started already. We already have fact checkers. We already have regulatory bodies that they have mentioned that actually talks to the internet because they need to reach in order for their corporate to like propagate their social media standing. So this is important in order for you to consider, because under the info slide, these are not trained individuals building new media institution from the ground up. These are literally influencers or social media personalities who suddenly enter journalism. So literally they're out of the debate. So let's first talk about like what kind of rise is really happening. Because the case coming from opposition is that if you have more rise, therefore you will have more competition and you are literally incentivized to be more credible at the end of the day. We point out that the problem is not just like you have this influencers like Banat, Jack, and any other political personalities that exist. The problem is that the rise of social media journalism created the conditions for these figures to become politically powerful in the first place because of the rise of people jumping into this. I.e., it rewards people who are most emotional, most polarizing, and most willing to package politics into entertainment. That is why it's not comparable to the other rise of industries wherein you have more competition because you have more number, therefore you can produce better quality. Because in these instances, you only need to look believable in order for you to get a buy-in. Like really, you like as a DDS supporter, if I hear Tio Moreno speaking shit about Lenny, do you really think that I would fact check it as an audience watching that or as an audience looking at that post within social media? And it is why we say that it is in these instances wherein, one, if they don't file a case against these influencers, that means this harms will propagate, and two, you literally have a director who's continually shitting on Lenny for some reason, but it never stopped, and they got more buy-in, we got more jump within that specific trend because of the rise. And this is the distinction that opposition misses. The harmful cases that we have talked about are not just ordinary mistakes that can be cleaned up by a later correction. This is why these are quote-unquote critical hits and weighing the debate. And the second part of this is on access of the rise. They say that influencer journalism is good because it gives people easier access to information and allow faster political correction or reform. The problem is that in political information, speed and access do not automatically improve the truth. The content that wins online, as you can see right now, even in the Filipino context, is not necessarily the most accurate. It is the fastest, angriest, easiest to remember, and the most identity firming. This is why you bite into your own confirmation bias as someone who is reading this context or reading his papers, for example. So when they talk about like, credibility is the metric of success of these influencers, therefore it's easy for us to scrutinize them because it's literally the main point of their market. Like really? That assumes that the judges or that assumes that the audience says judge influencers like usual fact checker. In fact, I point out that they do not. Most of the time, the people that doom scroll, the people that follow these influencers actually just follows these influencers because those influencers already confirm what they believe, speak their language, attack the people that they dislike, and make the side they feel morally correct. So even in the instances that maybe it's good, maybe it helped other people to reach into that further success, maybe it helped reach like the non-popular news, I can say that that can happen absent the rise. Like literally, you can have lesser social media influencers. You can have lesser influencers who also talk about this context. The difference is that the way that we accept them and the way that we view them carries more scrutiny in comparison to what we have into the status quo, where suddenly believe them. Suddenly we have this rise. Suddenly it's hard for us to call them out. It's hard for us to file civil cases against them because there are a lot of people, and most of the time the peoples that are attached within this news aren't even contesting the claims, aren't even filing the criminal case that they should file. So that doesn't really clear out any problem. That doesn't clear out any problems that we have pushed them forward to answer. But before that, any PY. 3, 2, 1. So going back, so this already takes out like on how it democratizes truth, because we flip this by saying that these are just the propaganda machine that are easier to diversify. The second problem is that the rise to normalization of these influencers that gives them cover, like i.e. the more people accept influencer journalism as a normal source of news, therefore the less that they scrutinize it. It makes propaganda harder to identify, harder to criticize, and harder to punish because it no longer looks like a propaganda. Like literally, it looks like a public opinion representing them to this form of media narrative. So note, it's only recently where influencers were now summoned in court for questioning, but the end result is ding 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 ding. It only looked like the traditional institution hate the truth. That's why they imprison this quote unquote influencer journalist. So when they point out that this happens because a lot of people distrust in formal institution, then this actually capitalizes that hard and make it harder to correct the minds of an average Joe, because when you call out these influencers, it will look like you have like this boogeyman that actually wants to silence them for some reason. And it also happens with Andrew Tate, by the way. So this is why misinformation becomes permanent in their side, and even if so, like it's like almost permanent, because once a lie reaches the wrong audience, disproving it is already an uphill battle. The correction has to reach the same people with the same intensity through the algorithmic networks that we have. So that almost never happens. That's why in the status quo, Mocha Uson is still popular for DDS supporters and even Tio Moreno. But then they try to say that we need to have a comparative between traditional media versus influencer journalism. We say that they can coexist in both sides. It's just that in our side we have more regulation for both of them, and if people are unhappy, then therefore they can comment on it. They can create their own discussion. Like literally, you don't need the rise that actually harms and forwards this narrative that are much harder to correct and much harder to divert into the factual statement that is actually fruitful.